All right, before I lost power, Chris had asked the question, or I could maybe ask it afterwards, does it work now? No, and I've already found another error. And actually, I found something I should have put in. Nobody even mentioned this, but at the top, we should have put in use strict. All right, should have put that in at the top. Didn't. Okay, so let's save that. And I'm going to go back and run the program again, and I'll show you the error it has now. Okay, I'm going to actually put in values. And calculate, and I get that. And I get nothing for the trip cost. Okay, so I hit F12, and it tells me that someplace in my program, instead of saying gallons, I said gallon. I'm not doing this on purpose. It's nice that it's working out like this. But that's in line 80. So I go peruse my way through here, find line 80, and on line 80, that should have said gallons instead of gallon. My error. So I'm going to go back again and run it again. Well, now that's all working. All right, I mean, 200 divided by 8 is 25, and I gave you practice data. That was the one, and these are all correct. Now, does clear work? That does. I can already see something I don't like, and I don't know why it's not working, but remember, I thought that when I put in 200 here, and 8, and 3, and click calculate, those were all supposed to go away, and they didn't. So something looks hinky there. The other thing is, what if I put nothing in there? Okay, well that's good. I've got invalid out of range output there, so that's good. Clear, that didn't change it back. So there's still problems in here. All right, I think everybody'd agree with that. The problem that you run into, though, is now if I hit F12, it's not giving me any errors. So in other words, the syntax errors that I had in the program have now all been rectified. So there's still problems with the program, but now I have to dig through it and figure. What's that? Oh. All right, well, that actually what that does is it gives me all the errors that it's found so far. All right. But what I am telling you is you will reach a point where you go through here and you put in valid values, you get a valid result. You hit F12, nothing will show. You run it again, you put in invalid values, you hit F12, and nothing will show. But you don't get the output you're supposed to have. So once you get to that point, then you, as a programmer, have to start digging through the code to find out what's not working the way that it's supposed to be working. Does that make sense? All right. Now, I'm going to leave that to you. All right. I have a working copy, but I'm going to leave that to you. And I don't think that's asking too much. I really don't. You're going to have to dig through it and take a look for it. So it works when you put in valid values. So start putting in invalid values and take a look at it. I want to go on, and I want to go to the second page of your test. All right, and I've already identified the errors. First is I purposely spelled strict wrong to see if anybody'd find that. All right, you say, well, that's not an error. Well, it doesn't use strict when you spell it with a K. So that was the first one. Second, I had returned document.getElementById. That D that's in there that is capitalized should be lowercase. That was the second thing. Next, this wasn't technically an error, but you may have said something about it, you may not have. But that's not going to create a random number between 1 and 100. That's going to create a random number between 1 and 1,000. So if you didn't identify that one, that's not technically an error. But I'm just telling you, from what we've been doing, that's erroneous. All right. Here we're calling odds or even, where the routine itself is called odd or even. So what we're doing here is we are calling a non-existent function. All right. Here, they should have been tote odds plus plus. And I only put one plus there. Again, purposely. All right. Now, what you may or may not know is, guess what? That is not an error. All right. We have not talked about this yet, but JavaScript, as many other languages do, has what's called an identity operator. And I want to show you what it is. All right. You can go and you can look it up on Stack Overflow or whatever, but I'd rather show you what it is. And that is, I'm going to come in here. I'm not going to write a complete program, but I'm just going to write a little bit of code. So I'm going to type in here var x equals 21, var y equals 21. And I know one is in double quotes and one is not. All right? Okay. Now, common sense should tell you that if I put in two equals like that, that should come back and say they are not the same. But what happens is it comes back and it says they are the same. Because JavaScript is one of those kind of funky little languages that it says, oh, that's a number and that's a string. You must mean that you want to convert that over to a number. So it does the conversion for you. So this actually will come back. This is an equality operator. That's what it's referred to as. So this will actually come back. They will be the same. It'll come back and say they are the same. All right? If you put an extra equal sign in here, it's not the equality operator anymore. It's called the equality and identity operator. It says, are they the same and are they the same data type before you made any changes? They are not. So putting in three equal signs will cause it to say they are not the same. So I would not take off if you mark that as being wrong, but it actually is a better way of doing it. Typically, if you're comparing, especially if you're comparing apples and oranges, and you want to make sure that the comparison is being done correctly, you use three equal signs instead of two. Not only that, for not equal then, it now looks like that. And again, right before during the break, I went out to Stack Overflow and I just looked up JavaScript comparison operator, identity versus equality. And there are plenty of them out there. They'll probably give you maybe a more succinct explanation than what I just gave you. All right. All right. So what I wanted to do, like I said, we got to still have some errors in there, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's going to cause you to do some debugging. All right? But I think what I'll do is to try, yes, sir. On which, on this page or the other? I'm sorry, there was a missing what? Oh, okay. I got you. You're right. There was an error there. I just didn't record that one. But the idea, what you were supposed to be forced into doing there, was to keep hitting F12 to find as many errors as you possibly could. But remember that F12, when you bring that up in the console, that finds syntax errors. All right? So again, it's not going to find this whether that's right or wrong. That's a logic error. All right? If I had put in this where I meant to put in equal, the system doesn't know that's what I meant. So it'll flag things that are obvious to it. All right, and that's basically going to be just when you broke the rules of the language. All right, I think what I'll do, so I don't have to worry about screwing up any typing, is I'll put the next program, and I'll actually put it up here, the guessing game one. So if you want to see that, that's fine. Oops, I don't want to bring that up like that. So let's get rid of, all right, there it is. Let's first see if it works. Check yes. Well, there's nothing to check, so that would be invalid. That makes sense. Still is invalid. Good. If I put in something that's less than 1, good. If I put in something that's greater than 100, that's good. All right. If I put in a valid value, okay, well, that's good. It's telling me that. Okay, so it looks like it works, as far as I can tell. All right, so 88 was the number. If I click new number and I put in 88, chances of that being 88 again are not very good. All right, so let's take a look at what's in there. First of all, before we look, and I'll put the code up there in just a minute. But first of all, I'm going to ask the same question that I asked you before. Is there anything in here? Does everybody feel comfortable building a simple form and sticking all that stuff in there? And let me tell you why I'm asking you the question. Because one of the things that we go into in Chapter 7 is we talk about the concept of timers. Okay? Now, you may or may not remember this. You're all too young to remember this. But back in the olden days, when you had an alarm clock, it didn't have a snooze feature on it. So, you know, you'd wind it up, you'd set it up for the alarm, it would go off, you'd turn it off. Okay? All right. Why am I telling you that? Because when you set up timers in JavaScript, you can set up a timer like that. That after 5 seconds, something happens. Whatever that something is. All right? Or you can have a timer that repeats, which is kind of like hitting snooze, where in 9 minutes, the timer goes off again. You hit snooze, in 9 minutes, the timer goes off again. So in JavaScript, you can set up either kind of those timers. Again, why am I telling you this? Well, think about this. If I do this, and I come through here, and I put in check yes, I don't really want that invalid guess to stay there. I maybe want it to stay there for 5 seconds. I don't want it to disappear. Does that make sense? That would, to me, would be more reminiscent of if I was actually playing a game, what I'd expect to find. All right? And I might want it that, rather than saying invalid guess, that if I put something that's out of range, I might want it, instead of invalid guess, I might want it to say, your number must be between 1 and 100, and then have it disappear. So that's the kind of thing that we're going to be looking at in Chapter 7. All right? We're going to talk both about timers, about how to, if you've got a hyperlink, and you want it, when you click it, you don't want anything to happen, how you make that happen. All right? And we're also going to talk about how to swap images in and out. So we're going to look at all that stuff. All right. So let's look at the code here. I just asked, and people said you had no problem understanding this. All right, I gave you that code anyway. So let's look at the actual JavaScript to see what's happening. First, let me close off some of this stuff that I've got open. Gee, there it is. Okay, this one I did remember to say use strict for. All right, and I did make, so here, I did make a few more global variables than I had before. And I won't lie to you, when I did this one, I was watching television, which is never a good thing to do when you're coding. All right, so I started getting a little lazy. But these everybody should have had. You were told to put those in there. Min number and max number. Minimum number was 1, the maximum number was 100. Okay? Then here, and I think I mentioned this to you the other day, this is random number between 1 and 100. And unfortunately, when you put Rn together, it looks like an M. But it's not an M. It's Rn. All right? This should make sense, hopefully, based on the name of it. So that's number of guesses made. All right? And this will be the random number guess flag. All right? Now, I could have called it is right guess or whatever. I just called it guessed it. My question is, everything that's right here, right there, in those first 10 lines, is there anything in there that people don't understand? All right. Then the next thing that I did here was to, again, alias the document dot get element by ID function. So again, rather than having to put in document dot get element by ID, I can now replace it with a $sign. Does that make sense to everyone? Yes? All right. Next, if we go back to here and we look here, okay, you were told to make the minimum and the maximum, etc. But when you look at this, this is a simpler interface. This is a simpler interface than the other one we had. What do I mean? Well, first of all, we only have one input, correct? And that's our guess. All right? And I've got here check guess, and I've got recent. In fact, this is an old copy, so I think I'm giving you an old copy. Let me double check. Key. It says it is the right one. So it's a new number. Run. Oh, it's because, like I told you, I put in 3 buttons. Okay? Yeah, it's not. It is a new copy. All right. So my interface looks different than the interface that was put in on your test. Could I have done this with just 2 buttons? Yes. Should I have done that with just 2 buttons? Maybe, because I had you do it. All right. But I made another one. All right. So, start to think about this. First of all, can somebody please tell me? I'll give you a hint. There's 3 things. What 3 things do I want to have happen when I click the button that says Reset Form? What 3 things on that screen? You want the 2 text boxes to clear. Yeah. I think the word you're looking for is focus. Yeah. And we want the focus to be set to that first input box. Does that make sense? So that's what I wrote first. Again, because I found that to be the easiest. First thing I did was to register those functions down here. I'm hoping and hopeful that by now everything that's in here makes sense to you. This first line says, when you click the calculate button, call process entries. The second one says, when you click the reset form button, or the reset button, call reset the form. This says when you calculate the button that says new number, you'll call get new number. This will make sure that when the program loads, that text box has got the focus. So my question for you then is, out of what I just showed you, is there anything in these 6 lines of code? Anything? Is there anything that's in there that doesn't make sense? You will be refining one of these programs on your next test. But it will be expected that you know how to do this. All right? So I know at a minimum I've got 3 different functions that I have to write. Does that make sense to everybody? I know I've got 3 functions. I'm going to have to write process entries, I'm going to have to write reset the form, and I'm going to have to write get new number. There may be other functions, but at a minimum, I'm going to have to do those. All right? Well, again, the order in which we did these is up to us, but I did the get new number first. So there's get new number right there. I tell it to reset the form, I tell it to reset my number of guesses to 0, and I tell it to give me a new random number. That's what's going to happen if I click the button that says reset the form, or reset, or whatever the heck it said. All right? I think it says reset form. So again, if you look up on the screen, in English, what we're saying is, if we click the button, in fact, I don't want that one. Fortunately, I want this one. All right. When we click, sorry, I know it looks a little goofy, but when we click the button that says reset form, as Luke just told us, we want what's ever in there to be cleared, we want what's ever in there to be cleared, and we want the cursor to go there. That'll be here. But when we click the new number, all we want to have happen is we want to reset the form. We want these all to be empty. We want to reset our number of guesses. If you don't reset your number of guesses, so let's say I play it. Let's say the number's 50. I put in 40. It says too low, try again. I put in 50. It says you guessed it in 2 guesses. Now I click the button to give me a new number. And it's 50, and I put in 50. I guessed it on the first time, but it says you made 3 guesses. So you have to make sure that each time you start a new game, you're resetting your number of guesses counter. Does that make sense? So again, last time, what this one is when I click the button that says new number, I want these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, 6 if you count the comment. All right? I want those lines to run. Last time. Any questions on that? Then how about reset the form? Well, that's right up above this. So now you can see 2/3 of the program. When you click the new number, you get this. When you click the reset the form, you get that one. And it's exactly what we talked about. All right. The other thing, I guess, that Luke, you didn't say, but I'm sure you knew it was there, was we wanted to make sure when we reset the form that this status, that probably should have been an asterisk. Oh, there. I was going to say, that's got to be an asterisk. All right. Writing your code like this, modularizing it, you've noticed that 2/3 of the code that I've written right here have been very small routines. All right? Now, what most people will tell you is you should try to write a function that at a maximum is about 20 lines long, because that's about the size of your screen. All right. Now, that said, I want to show you something. You may laugh, but you know, when you do this long enough and you deal with people who, you know, whatever. I've had people tell me this. See, it all fits on one screen because they made the screen that small. See what I'm saying? But here we've got, I don't know, 50, 60 lines of code. You don't want to do that if you can help it. Does that mean that you would never, ever, ever write something that was more than, of course not. All right. The problem is when you get out into an actual environment, sometimes people just keep adding on to the same function and adding on and adding on and adding on when they shouldn't. All right. As an example, when I started my first programming job, I looked at this function and it was 5,000 lines long. When you ran the program, you got an error message that came up at the end of the function. So that meant I had to dig through 5,000 lines to figure out where the error was. And I figured it out. It took a while. But if it had been broken up into different functions, I think I could have found the error much faster. All right. But again, what had happened is somebody wrote the initial function. It wasn't that big, but people just kept adding on and adding on and adding on to it. So I've asked. No one had any questions here. No one had any questions here. And no one had any questions here. Is that correct? So what's left then is the process entries when you click the calculate button. Yes? Yes.
For window.onload, do you need the semicolon at the very bottom? Like really brief? But I thought we do that for the bottom.
Right here?
Yeah.
Technically you don't, but I was always taught that anytime you are creating one of these anonymous functions and an anonymous function is unnamed, all right, you should always put a semicolon at the end. If you tell me, well, I didn't and it works fine, then don't. All right, so let's go up to the process entries then. Now, look, just stop for a second. Don't type anything. Please just look for a second. Notice I didn't do everything in there. So what do we have? We're going to grab our guess. All right. We're going to take our status and make sure it's empty. Then we're going to ask if you guessed it. What if guessed it? What does that mean? That's that Boolean that we originally set to true. Why would we want to set it to true? Because when the game starts, we want to get a new number. I want to make sure that happens. So that'll get a new number so that the control, what I want you to understand, look on the screen. The program's running. It hits this line. It hits this line. It hits this line. Control then goes from line 25 down to line 43. Does that make sense? When you call a function calls a function, there is a transfer of control. So it goes through this check your guess. It does all this good stuff. It hits that ending curly brace, and it comes back up then to whatever line comes after that. So it comes back up to here. Does that make sense? You have to understand the flow of control in a program. So here it is. So I'm going to put some comments in here. Okay? Grab guess from associated text box. That's what we're doing. I'll say empty, guess status, all right, disable text box. All right. Check guessed it flag. If true, call get new number. All right. what I want you to understand, if you'd please look up on the screen. Okay? When you write a program that's like this, when it's an interactive program that you're writing using a form, you may or may not have noticed. All right, I'm going to go up to the top here, and I'm going to do a Control H to search. I could do an F2, but I'm just going to do an H. And I'm going to put in here the word while and do a find next. There is none. I'm going to put in for. I'm going to click find next. There is none. Since there's no while, there's no do while. What I'm getting to is you have no idea whatsoever when someone starts playing this game if they're going to play it once, twice, or 1,000 times. There is no looping in a program like this. Whereas when we did it in class, originally, we had a loop. All right? So we come in here again. We grab the guess. We empty the text box. We check the guessed it flag. If it's true, we call the get number function. All right? Then, what are we doing here? We validate the guess. So remember, when we're validating the guess could be non-numeric, the guess could be less than 1, the guess could be greater than 100. It's the same pattern of stuff that we used last time. All right? And I'm making sure, so I'm setting where that asterisk was, I'm setting it to invalid guess. I'm blanking out whatever we put in for the guess. All right? I'm also coming in here and putting the focus there, and I'm making sure that my guessed it is set to false. Anybody make a, no pun intended, I could have left this out, but does anybody know what that does? That line in gray? It just says, I don't care what comes after this in the function, get out. Return to whatever call this function. And I just wanted to show you what a return is by itself, just a return. All right? Next semester, when we're working in C#, when we return something, if we return a value, so if we return 3, then the return type will be int. If we return the string hello, the return type will be string. If we return nothing, the return type will be void, V-O-I-D. Just so you'll see that all next semester. All right? Now, if the guess validated, so if it wasn't bad, then we get to here. So I know, in other words, this right here, this was an invalid guess. If it's true. All right? This is a valid guess. If it's true. Does that make sense? And I'm just putting in these comments for my own edification, my own clarification. So I know as I'm looking at this stuff, what's what. All right? So what do I know? I know the guess was valid, so I want to remove that asterisk. And that's what that line right there in gray is doing. So I've removed the asterisk. But now, I'm asking you this question, is it pretty obvious, based on the name of that, what I'm going to do in that routine? I'm going to check the guess to see it's one of 3 things now. It's either too low a guess, too high a guess, or it's a correct guess. I know it's got to be one of those. All right? So I go down to check your guess. And I've got this thing I just call return value. Don't even worry about it right now. All right? But I know I made a valid guess. So I've got to add 1 to my number of guesses counter. Now I want to check it. And I'm either going to be putting in there your guess of 30 was too low, try again. Your guess of 30 was too high, try again. Or correct guess of 30 in 4 guesses. Something like that. It'll be one of those. So I'm setting this variable called retval. All right, I'm setting it to one of those values. Notice guessed it equal false if it was a wrong guess. Guessed it equal true if it's a right guess. Then I take whatever I set this retval to, this or this or this, and I set that equal to what I put in my disabled text box. Does that make sense? All right. And let's, really, we've all been there. So if you, yeah, it makes sense when you do it. Yeah. But I want it to make sense when you're doing it. All right. So taking it from the top, and remember, this is being taped. So if you miss something or whatever, yours still doesn't work, you'll be able to see all of it. Okay. We did our use strict. We declared and we initialized our global constants. We declared and initialized our global variables. We aliased the document.getElementById function. Then we came to our process entries, where we, as it says, we grab the guess from the text box. We don't want anything in the status yet because we don't know what the status is. And we check the flag called guessed it. Okay? If it was true, okay, and we did set it to true initially, so if it was true, we called get new number, which bounced us down to here. Well, wherever it was, I guess it was down further there, which did just that. Got us a new number. Let's reset all the form, and it gave us a new number. Once we hit that line that said get new number, then we came down here and validated it. If it didn't meet the validation, meaning either we left it blank or non-numeric or less than 1 or greater than 100, we ran the code right here. Otherwise, we knew that it was a valid number. It may not be the number, but it was a valid number. All right? So, we set the guess accordingly on our form. Here we remove the asterisk or error message if there was one there, and we call check your guess. And that's exactly what we did. If it was too low, we gave them a too low message. Otherwise, if it was too high, we gave them a too high message. Otherwise, if it was correct, we gave them a correct message. If it was too low or too high, we set guessed it to false for that and for this. If it was correct, we set guessed it to true. The biggest problem that I have found with most people is when they start writing programs like this, they make things too hard. And the biggest way that people make things too hard is they try to do everything in one routine. That's why I tried to show you some modularization here, where I broke it up over multiple routines. All right. Any questions on this one? So again, if you do have questions later, you can email me, or you can go back and you can look at this recording. All right. Now, during the break, I think it was Mr. Young who came up and asked me a question, so I'm going to attempt to answer that question right now. Let's see. All right. Earlier in the semester, a week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was when we started on this stuff, we talked about the fact that for every chapter, you were going to have to do the short exercises and you were going to have to do the extra exercises. All right? Now, you'll have an hour today. I realize that's not a lot of time, but that is some time. All right, since I kind of goofed up here, try by Friday when you leave here to have the extra exercises for chapters 2 through 4. There was none on 5. So those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, those 8 exercises. And on the short ones, those 5 exercises. Now, with many of, especially the short ones, with many of these, they're going to take you 5 minutes to do. All right? The other ones will take you more than that. Usually with the other ones, the ones on here, normally what they give you is a JavaScript file that's almost empty, all right, and an HTML file that we'll call that JavaScript file. So you have to fill in the guts. Okay? So in other words, I mean, take a look at what's in here. Convert Fahrenheit to Celsius. Then enhance that. Then convert a number grade to a letter grade. Then allow a user to enter in as many numbers as they want and keep a count. Now, what may be a little tough is this sales array. All right? Do the best you can do with it. It turns out that nobody can do it. All right? Then we will go over it as a class next week. All right? Develop a sales tax calculator, develop a change calculator, develop an income tax calculator. Now, just so you know, I'm giving you a heads up, what will be due a week from Friday will be those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 extra exercises and oops. No, that wasn't good. I can't stop clicking that. And those 1, 2, 3 short exercises. So, hopefully, John, I answered your question. By Friday, have all of the short exercises and the extra exercises for chapters 2 through 5. You don't have to do the one on chapter 1. You can, but you don't have to. All right? Now, what we will do the rest of the period today will be lab. Tomorrow, I am going to go over chapters 6 and 7, and the rest of the period will be lab. Friday, I'm not going to give you any tests this week. No written, no nothing. So Friday will be lab the entire period. So hopefully if you're behind, that will give you a chance to catch up. All right? Then we are off next Monday, remember. The school closes for Veterans Day, so there will be no classes Monday. On Tuesday, I will give you a test review for chapters 6 and 7, but as promised, we're going to go and we're going to build a website from scratch. We're going to do everything. We're going to wireframe it, where we're going to draw out what it looks like, and then we're going to create the whole thing. First, we'll create it just using HTML, CSS, etc. Then we'll go back and we'll bootstrap it. That makes sense? All right. My hope is, maybe I'm wrong, we'll see, but my hope is we can do that and sneak in there maybe like Wednesday and Thursday the written test for chapter 6 and the written test for chapter 7. We'll see how it goes. All right. And then there will be a hands-on test for chapter 6 and 7. We may not get to that next week. It may be near the beginning of the following week. All right, then we'll jump into the jQuery part of the class. All right. The other thing I have to be doing with you is we have to spend a good part of our morning, one day, all right, going over the electronic portfolios that you have to create. All right. So we will do that, and we will do that sooner as opposed to later. Any questions on anything? All right, then you've got the last hour, okay, to go and work on your homework. And if you want to walk around and just talk to anybody or see what they're doing, you know, feel free to do that, okay? Or if you got any more questions for me, I'll be glad to at least try to answer them.